the attendance sheet. You have to attend 5 out of the 6 sessions to be able to graduate, and we judge that based on the attendance sheet, so really important that you sign that every night that you're here. Also, I've seen lots of you at our city council meetings and some BCC meetings, so you're getting out there and doing your attendance verification. If any of you have completed those, I know I already have 3 forms from 3 of you, so if any of you have any more, you can just leave them on the table over here, and I'll get those from you. And then the surveys at the end of the night, same thing, if you can just leave them on the table, that would be perfect. So tonight we have, the theme is building a community, and you will hear from Development Services and then Public Works. So we'll get things going with Martin Scribner, our Development Services Director.
Okay. I'm not sure how the other directors have been doing this, but if you have questions as we go, just go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll answer questions as we go rather than at the end. If you have, I'm going to encourage you to come up front. If you have a soft voice and you have questions, I would require you to be up front because I won't be able to hear you. First off, a question: have you guys heard from Community Services yet? Okay, this is not going to be anywhere near as fun as Community Services. We all know it. Unfortunately, Development Services, again, is kind of a dry subject, so I'm going to do my best not to put you to sleep. We have quite a lot that we do as a department. It's kind of spread out, and I don't want to say we're a catch-all department, but at times it feels that way. So, that said, this is our goal for the Development Services. Basically, we facilitate the whole development process, protect health, safety, welfare of the community. That's something that, as I'm by education and experience an urban planner, and this is something we always talk about: health, safety, and public welfare, and that's really at the heart of what Development Services does as a department. We basically have it's 4 divisions within the department. So we have building safety, code compliance, otherwise known as code enforcement, planning, and transportation. And transportation, a lot of that kind of falls up under planning. So let's see. Basically, the way it's worked out, I am the director of Development Services. I have a management analyst who's kind of my right hand. Then we have the planning division, the planning and zoning administrator, and our transportation and transit planner, and the other planners underneath that. And then building safety, which covers, is our development manager, and that covers code enforcement, building inspections, plans review, data entry for business licenses. That's something that's a new task that we've taken on, as well as any kind of permit technician, so anybody who brings the permits in at the front counter. As you walk in, those are our permit techs. And then systems analyst. Basically, we have a computer system that kind of ushers the whole process through. So we have a systems analyst who administers that program. Again, our purpose is really, remember that, protect health, safety, and public welfare. And we really value three things very highly. The first is citizen participation, public input. You'll see that anything we do, especially from the planner's side of things, we are going out and we're trying to get as much input as we can. We are not the decision makers in the department. We are trying to bring all the information together into one spot and give that to our decision makers so that they can hopefully make a well-informed decision and know what their constituents are thinking as we move forward. We do a lot of different surveys, and whenever we do, if you voted in the election and saw the general plan on the ballot, that was again something where it was 2 years worth of public input. We're doing a housing needs assessment right now, and that's something we've tried to gather as much public input as we can. Ultimately, we are charged with enforcement of the general plan, the codes, ordinances, design standards, and those are all these, again, council adopted but citizen input documents. And we also have to ensure that all new development meets minimum code standards. So, facilitating new development. What you're looking at is actually This is the Banner Health Center over on Porter Road. So if you drive past that clinic all the time, this is when they first came in back in, looks like 2011. This was one of the plans. It's just to kind of give you an idea and to serve as a backdrop for the rest of it. So development services really serves as the liaison for the entire process for development. So we are the ushers of that process, and we have a lot of different city departments as well as outside agencies that are involved in the development review process, depending on what the application is. But that includes Public Works, who you'll hear from tonight, Fire, Parks and Rec, Economic Development, and then we have some outside services that are involved in that process, the utilities, the schools. Sometimes we get into the state departments, so you'll have Arizona Department of Transportation or Department of Environmental Quality, as well as some of the federal entities like FEMA or any of the tribal communities. We handle building permits. So anytime you need to do something that involves either a new house, say you're going to put in a pool, or a room addition or something like that, as well as any kind of commercial, industrial type uses, new buildings, tenants, those all require building permits. So initially we take in those building permit applications, we do the plan review. And we used to do that all on paper. In the last year and a half, we have moved to an entirely electronic system. So we used to get these giant rolls of paper that, literally tons of paper for, say, like a Walmart project or a new school. They'd come in with these small trailers filled with paper rolls. We no longer take any of that paper. We do everything electronically now, so we're pretty proud of that. Also, any kind of permit requires an inspection after the permit is issued and you're at certain stages in the building process. Have any of you ever applied for a building permit here? Maybe for a pool or something like that? Then you pretty much go through the same process as Fry's did or one of those. It's a different level of scrutiny and different requirements from a regulation standpoint. But the process itself, reviewing it and going through inspections, is all pretty much the same. So again, those inspections are required depending on the permit, how many inspections, but up to maybe 20 or 30 inspections depending on what you have going on. At the time of inspection, our inspectors are looking for any kind of building code violations at the same time, any kind of building code, plumbing, electrical, mechanical, those types of things. If they see something that's not within code, then they have to either shut it down or they have to make sure that the contractors that they're seeing that, what our building inspector is seeing. You have a question? Okay, the question was, do the permits come before or after HOA approval? So if we're in a residential area, is what we're talking about, say it's an addition to a house, something like that, it's really independent of the HOA approval. HOA approvals and their rules and say your covenants and restrictions in your neighborhoods, those are pretty much all HOA. Their process is completely independent of what we do. So to be honest, we rely on the HOAs to kind of police that on their own. Not the best system in the world, but at this point in the game, that's what we've got. Does that answer your question? We also handle code compliance. Again, I call it code enforcement. My supervisor calls it code compliance. It's pretty much all the same. We have city codes, obviously, that are designed to address any kind of nuisances, anything that does not make your neighborhood a better place to be. Anything that, as you can see, that picture is from about a year and a half ago, and it is one of the neighborhoods here in Maricopa. If you recognize it, don't shout it out. Unless you want to shame somebody, then go for it. I'm fine with that. So the first thing that we're looking for unsafe existing structures. We do have zoning ordinance that has requirements for structures, so we're looking for anything, again, that's in violation of those codes. You'll see That's what that property, that's the same property, about 2 months after that first picture was taken. Really, it's the code compliance process. We're really looking for, the word escapes me. We want people to go ahead and come into compliance on their own. We voluntary. I couldn't think of the word voluntary. We're looking for a voluntary compliance, but really what we're doing is we're mostly making people aware. Hey, you've got a problem. If there's as you could see in that one, there was a safety and health issue potentially, and that was something that was pretty high priority. Did you have a question?
Yes, Martin, does the Heritage District have a different code? How does that work with it?
Does the Heritage District have a different code for as far as like what we're looking at, just in zoning in general?
Yes.
So the Heritage District falls under the same zoning code as the rest of the city. However, there is what we call an overlay district, which is exactly what it sounds like. You have your regular zoning, and then we take, you basically draw a big circle around this, and you say, okay, over and above the other zoning regulations, we have this overlay district. So it does have that overlay district that provides for some additional guidelines and regulations. So yes and no. It's pretty extensive, so it's kind of, I can't really outline it tonight, but. Does that answer your question?
Yes and no.
Yes and no. I accept that answer. Again, we're looking for blight on private properties. We're looking for cars that are sitting out that are obviously inoperable. We're looking for illegal signs. We're looking for tall weeds or grass. We're looking for people who have dumped their garbage places. Again, when it's on a private property, that's one issue. If it's on a public property, that's another issue. So if you see something that's say, in a I don't know, in a city-owned property in the right-of-way somewhere, that's something where I'd probably call Josh or one of his guys and say, okay, can you have somebody go out there and clean this up, do whatever needs to be done. If it's on a private property, then I have to get a hold of the property owner. And that can often be very problematic. If they don't want to answer my calls or answer our letters, then it becomes difficult. So, did you have a question? Yes, that's correct. The code itself, and we have adopted another piece of code called the International Property Maintenance Code that is kind of just a universally known set of regulations that really kind of, it more handles the process. It does give us some sort of limited authority to go on private property, but as a general rule, I tell my code enforcement officer, don't, because we don't want to put anybody back. We don't want to cause any problems. If there is a safety issue, I'll send the police and have the police kind of deal with it. So. There is no regulation on number of cars in front of your home. Okay, so let me see if I can summarize that for the recording. You're asking about trailers and cars and things of that nature parked out in front of a house. Are you in a neighborhood or are you outside of the subdivision? I'm sorry? Okay. So ordinarily for cars that are parked or even trailers or anything like that, the city really relies on the HOAs as our sort of first line of defense. Again, we've got to get into there's a division there of whether it's against your covenants and restrictions or whether it's against a city code like zoning. If it's a zoning code issue, I'll send an enforcement officer. If it's something that's kind of beyond zoning, then we'll send police. Parked cars is not an issue in almost all of our neighborhoods. So I'll be really clear on that because we get questions all the time. I live in Rancho, so I do this a lot as I'm going home because cars are parked on both sides. I know it's a pain. I also live on what I think is the longest straight stretch of road in town other than 347, and it is all that kind of swerving back and forth. I try to remind myself that if those cars weren't parked there, I'd be doing 70 by the time I got to my house, and that's not safe for me or anyone else. So I try to remind myself that at the very least, those cars are forcing me to slow down and forcing everyone else to slow down. I know that's not the answer anybody's looking for there. That said, the old zoning code and the old subdivision regulations that were in place when like Rancho was built or Cobblestone or any of the older subdivisions allowed for parking on both sides regardless of the width. The newer subdivision regulations, any new subdivisions you see come in, they have to be a certain width before you can park on both sides. Most of them are opting, I think, for parking on one side. It's 28 feet wide, I think, gives you a car parked on one side, something like that. And then you have to get to, I don't know what it is, 36 feet or something like that before you can park a car on the other side. So that doesn't answer your original question. Is when we get back to the trailer issue, trailers are, I don't remember if those are called out specifically in the code, or did you get a letter from the HOA or from the city? Okay. It's okay. So your letter came from the HOA. It was probably a CCNR issue, your covenants and restrictions. I'm not familiar with those, so. Right. Yeah. Again, I'm not familiar with the CCNRs, and so I couldn't really say. Yes. So the empty lot next to Fry's, south of Fry's, where that's all right now, it's currently fenced off. Your question was, do they need building permits in order to construct anything on that lot? Is that your question? The answer is yes. They have gone through what we call a development permit review, or a development review permit, DRP, which it's been over a year now. I want to say almost a year and a half since that went to our Planning and Zoning Commission for approval. So it's kind of been out there in the public for a while. All that had to be done, as well as some other sort of intermediary steps before they can apply for building permits. To date, they have not applied for any building permits. And nothing's going to be built there. We have some pretty good ideas of what's going to be built there, but I'm sorry? Do you remember what they're working on the development of the ground right now. So building pads, the utilities, I think they had to move some utilities around, some of the underground utilities, which is a pretty big undertaking. That's what they're doing now. They're getting all of it prepped. I don't have a crystal ball. Since they haven't applied for any permits, I'd like to say that they'll be building structures there this summer, but I just have no way to tell. They seem like they're pretty gung-ho about getting moving on those things, but until they break ground, I try not to hold my breath too much. So, question? No. That is the owner of the property and the developers. Correct. I mean, it is zoned for commercial. Again, the site plan was approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission, which is kind of a rough outline of here's where the buildings are going to go, and here's how big they're going to be, and here's how the traffic is going to work, and here's parking and all that kind of stuff. But when you get into the individual buildings, that's when they'll be going for permits. And again, we're confident that that is going to be built, and it is going to be built relatively soon. But they're probably going to do it in stages as well. We know that one of the buildings out towards the closer to 347 is going to be a Burger King. We do know there's, and these have been, I know, I saw the look at Burger King. What happened to Wendy's? No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, and because the zoning kind of allows, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself with the presentation, but because the zoning allows for such a wide array of commercial type uses, they can pretty much put whatever they want in there that's allowed within the zoning code. So it could be fast food, or it could be a tire store, or it could be an ice cream shop, or a Starbucks. Yeah, like we need another Starbucks in town. So yeah. I know that when we had the town hall last week, I guess that was last week or the week before, it was publicly announced we'd have a Dunkin' Donuts, we'd have a Ross clothing store, we'd have a Burger King, couple. I didn't see any sit-down restaurants now, so. That's what we were told at this. So I'm going to keep going back to the town hall. That's what we were told at town hall. So I'm going to stick with that. So, did you have a question? Right, Petco was one of the other ones I'd forgotten about. So the outlot that's right on the corner, they're saying we think this will be a restaurant, a sit-down restaurant, but they don't have any takers yet. So, let's fast forward 5 years and they don't find a restaurant, they'll make it something else. They're not saying that right now, but we kind of understand as a pattern of development. Yeah, we really would like to have a restaurant here to finish it out. But if it doesn't happen, then we'll find something else. So, yes, question? Okay, so your first question was, does the city go out and look for specific businesses to go at specific places, right? The answer to that is not really. Again, it's kind of up to the property owner to do that. What you're looking at up here this is our land use map that's part of our general plan. And it provides a guideline of, again, these sort of broad use categories that we know that in this big area, we that's maybe 200 acres or 600 or 1,000 acres, I don't know. We know that we want to see some stores of some sort, and we don't want to see industry or office. But that's about as specific as we get, unless it's a property that the city owns. The city does own a few larger properties, like the one we're sitting on now. This is actually 140 acres that the city owns. But we're not actively out there seeking. Again, there's probably a better question for economic development when they do their presentation. I assume you guys haven't seen economic development yet. So that's a great question to hold on to for Denise, because she'll be able to go into more specifics. I think they generally try to attract certain types of businesses, but then where they go is really going to be up to the businesses themselves. So your second question was, is MAP the only place you can go to find information like that? If you're paying attention to city council agendas or planning and zoning commission agendas, those are usually the first places you're going to find out about stuff like that, unless the newspaper has gotten a hold of it, and you're going to find out that way, which sometimes I find out that way. And then they come through the process, which is not usually the way it works, but it does happen. So if you have any specific questions, you can always call City Hall, and we can try and find out for sure. But a lot of times, we've been talking about the lot south of Fry's. Until they got some major players to sign contracts that they were definitely coming in, the developers were very guarded about that information, because if that information gets out, in fact, I'll give you a good example. Culvers almost didn't happen because the word got out that it was going to be a Culvers, and it got into the newspaper and it got out onto Facebook, and there were a lot of people saying, oh yeah, great, it's Culvers. And the Culvers guys kind of backed off and went, okay, hold on, we didn't want this getting out yet because we don't have all the details figured out yet. And there's still a chance, even if it's only 10%, there's still a chance we might not locate there because we just don't have all the numbers worked out. And that looks bad for them if they've been saying, yes, Culvers, and then they put the brakes on and say, okay, we're not doing this. So they're often very guarded about who is coming in. They'll give us uses, okay? They'll give us general uses, and they'll say, okay, this building along the back here, this is all gonna be retail, roughly 50,000 square feet here, 30,000 square feet here, and 10,000 square feet here. That's all I get, usually, until they're ready to actually release those types of information into the public. So. Yeah, Freddy's and that area over there. That property, it's public knowledge. That property is owned by Dignity Health. It's 18 acres. They have not given us any real indication as to what they're going to do there. I think it's safe to say they're not going to put a full hospital there. Maybe some medical offices. There was some talk of a standalone emergency room, but that fell through as far as I know. I don't know if they'll revisit that or not. So last time we talked to them was last summer, and they were talking about selling off a chunk of that to whatever. That said, I haven't heard nothing since then. The last year, they've just been quiet. So I don't know. Yes. Right. Okay. Okay. So you got a letter, you live in Tortosa, you got a letter that said they're building a bunch more homes. Tortosa is an enormous that Tortosa is they're building more homes in the Tortosa subdivision. Yeah, yes, but it's still part of, okay, so when I look at the plan itself, I look at all of the homes that they're building within this one zoning designation, right? So Tortosa has its own little zoning designation. It's what we call the PAD, which is a planned area development. I won't get into the specifics of what that is, but it basically is their own little zoning. That is Tortosa total is what, about 2,000 acres, 2,500 acres, something like that. And the first section that was built was probably a third of that. There is still 2/3 of Tortosa that has been planned for the last 12 years that haven't been built yet. That's one of these pieces that they've basically, this was the platting part of it. The platting is where they take the bigger chunks of property and they split it up into the little pieces that you guys buy to build homes on and build the streets and that sort of thing. So that's what they were doing, was they were finalizing the plat for another piece of Tortosa. I'm sorry? Well, they did the plat, and they now have 2 years to get going on doing some sort of development and building. I couldn't say for sure. They haven't really given us a timeline. I would expect for the end of the year they would be doing something, but I couldn't say for sure. Again, what you guys have to remember is that anything in development is really kind of stop and go, and they're looking at their marketing and what they think they can sell. Remember, they're in it to make money, and they're looking at their timelines, and they're looking, okay, what's my best timeline? What's going to happen with the market over the next 6 months, over the next 2 years, over the next 10 years, so that I can figure out where I'm going to get my best return. Do I start spending money? Remember that especially residential development, they don't see any money till 6 or 7 years down the road. I always think of them as they're gathering tons of big cartoon bags of cash as they go, and they don't see any real return on their investment, which is millions of dollars. And remember too, the banks aren't lending money like they were 10 years ago. The banks are really being a little bit more close-fisted about it, and a lot of these developers are going to private investors in order to get the money to get those things started. You have to have money to do anything. You have to have money to buy the property, to develop the roads and the infrastructure. It's tons and tons of cash. Those investors have to be paid back first before they see a dime one. So all of that to say, I never quite know where they're going to go with it. I know that there's been a lot of builders around town buying up lots like crazy. I expect to see building permit numbers go up for residential single-family homes. But until they do it, I have no way to know for sure. So I know it's kind of a long-rounded answer to a shorter question, but yes.
Are there any projected zones for apartments in Maricopa?
Great question. Are there any projected zones for apartments in Maricopa? I mentioned planned area development, PAD. Again, that is a very generic term to say, I'm a developer, I've come in and I'm going to create my own little zone. Maybe for 1,000 acres, maybe for 2,000 acres, whatever it is. A lot of those larger developments have areas within their own PADs that are designated for multifamily, for apartments, or for condos, or anything like that. We're not really seeing the interest from the builders quite yet. We've seen a couple of outside developers come in looking for land that they can rezone. And generally speaking, I think staff has been pretty supportive of that because we get questions like that all the time. We are, again, I mentioned that we're doing a housing needs assessment. Right now, we're in the middle of that. It should come out in June. That will kind of drive home the fact that Maricopa needs something other than just these single-family detached houses. And whether that be apartments, condos, assisted living for the elderly, things like that, all those things are going to come out. And we'll be able to really push that out to the real estate community so that they can see, oh, market-wise and need-wise, this is a real thing that Maricopa needs. And hopefully that's when we'll start kind of seeing a little bit more of that action. But again, all market-driven, so still very stop and go on that. If they think they can make a dollar doing it, then they'll be here in a heartbeat because the land is cheap. It still is very cheap compared to other areas. So, yes. I'm sorry, could you say that again? Butterfield headed towards, no, Honeycutt, it was Honeycutt and Porter. There were applications in for a Circle K out there a year ago, close to a year ago. I haven't seen anything else happen since, and maybe wasn't that long ago. It was maybe last fall. I don't know, maybe. Yeah. So let me try and move forward. I got to get through some of these slides, or Jennifer's going to shoot me. So let me try to do that. Maybe we'll see some appropriate places to put some of these other questions. Let me try to get through. Okay, so some of the other stuff that Development Services does. We also handle long-range planning. So again, if you saw the Planning Maricopa, which is our general plan, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's the general plan for the city, for development, it's a guideline. That was something that was on the ballots in November. Arizona is the only state and I've worked in 5 states now as a planner. Arizona is the only state I've ever seen that has everybody vote on your general plan. In other parts of the country, it's either called a comprehensive plan or a master plan, something like that. But it all pretty much means the same thing. We look at certain elements like land use, transportation, community health, parks, things of that nature. And we look at big picture for the next 20 years. And then we try to say, okay, what are the city goals according to, again, huge input. If you guys remember the Vision 2040 process, we in 2014 and 15, we use that as sort of a jump off point for the general plan input. And it's really kind of, like I said, big picture, goals, objectives. Here's what we need to be doing over the next 10 to 20 years. The horizon, what we look at is 20 years. But we re-examine that every 10 years. We're always, as planners, we're always re-examining it sort of on an ongoing basis. But every 10 years, we're required to update that document in order to keep up with our zoning, in order to, it really becomes the basis for a lot of other regulatory documents. So that's just one of the documents that's really our biggest long-range planning document for the city. We're looking to analyze the growth and the both local and regional demand and development trends, and then we recommend policy to the decision makers, to our elected official. And that's really what those documents are meant to do. We also manage and coordinate the special planning projects. I mentioned the general plan. We have some small area plans. Seven Ranches has its own plan, and overlay studies. So Heritage District, we call it the redevelopment area plan that was done in 2008. That has its own plan that resulted in an overlay zoning district, which is what I mentioned earlier. And then housing studies, that's one that we're doing now. Again, these are all kind of, if you think of the general plan being this big, and then we're kind of funneling down to some of these other smaller, more detailed plans, that's what we're doing. Oops. Planning staff also serves as a liaison to the Planning and Zoning Commission. How many of you were at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting last week? I know, okay, good, I had a couple at least. So, again, as the shepherds of the development process, planners are the ones who make all the presentations to Planning and Zoning Commission, and we bring those processes through, or we bring those projects through the process. So that's long-range planning. Then we have the current planning, and really most of your questions have come around current planning. So what's going here? What's happening next week? Zoning questions, apartments, Circle K, those are all what we consider current planning. So really what current planning does is it implements those other documents that we have, the general plan, zoning ordinance, the subdivision ordinance. We also review all the land use applications and any kind of permit applications, including items that go to Planning and Zoning Commission. So what you were looking at from Planning and Zoning Commission, if you remember that the motorsports complex application was one, and then it went to City Council last night. That was what we call a conditional use permit, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a use that we know it's allowed in that zoning district, but it's something that we know is going to need some extra scrutiny. It might need some conditions to make it palatable to the neighbors, to the community at large. So that's something that we take through that process, but that's something that we consider part of that sort of current planning process. And then zoning text and map amendments. In 2014, we adopted a brand new zoning code from scratch. When we became a city in 2003, following that incorporation, we just adopted the county's zoning code and changed wherever it said Pinal County, we changed it to Maricopa. We have a different type of development here, different types of zoning here that really weren't covered well by the Pinal County zoning code. That zoning code is also years old, so it was in bad need of updating. So we did that in 2014. We haven't really done any amendments to the zoning map itself, and that map is considered part of the zoning ordinance in total. But we will be doing that. So what that means is we're still kind of working off of the old zoning map, which still has all those county zoning designations. So we're working on getting those changed as we move forward. And then subdivision regulation amendments, we've done some minor. Again, subdivision regulations are, again, exactly what they sound like. Anytime you're putting in a subdivision or subdividing land, these are the regulations that cover that. So roadway standards, sidewalks, lighting, anything like that, those sorts of things, transportation type issues, those all come into play in the subdivision regulations. We are working on some amendments to those this year as well. Nothing too major, but just something to kind of keep it up to date, make sure that we're following all the development trends and that are happening right now. And again, the public support and outreach. We get a ton of phone calls where they're just asking a lot of questions you guys have asked tonight. Hey, I heard there's a Circle K coming in. What do you know about that? And we give whatever information we can. Or, hey, I'm getting ready to build a pool. What do I need to do? We do a ton of that type of just public support and outreach. Transportation. How many of you knew that we have a bus system? Most of you. That's good. I'm glad to see that. So as you see, that's one of our buses. It's I don't ever want to call it the short bus, but we do. So it's called Comet. It's the City of Maricopa Express Transit. We have kind of limited services right now, but that's something that we're working on expanding. And the more we see success in that area, the more we try to expand the service itself. We have had other bus services in the past, and really they kind of grew faster than the city could support. And so those bus services went away, and we had to start over. So we're taking a different tack at it now and really kind of incrementally growing the system. Last year, we added a couple hours a day to the Monday through Friday service. This coming year in October, we're hoping if budgeting goes the way we want it to, we'll be looking at extending that to a full 7 to 6 Monday through Friday service within the city. But we'll kind of see where that goes. So the long-range planning of that transportation, we do, again, so I already mentioned the transit. I kind of got ahead of myself. We just manage that day-to-day operation, the city's transit service. And then we also do long-range planning and transportation, where, again, kind of like the general plan and those things, we're looking at those local and regional policies and land development and how those all fit together and how we can grow and make the transportation work. We think a lot about the businesses that are coming in, but how do we make sure that you can get to those businesses, that you can get to Phoenix? Obviously, that one comes up a lot. What are you doing about 347? We don't own 347, so there's not much we can do other than beg the people who can to do something about it. So that's part of that long-range planning, both within the city and the connectivity to other places. You had a question?
I know there at one time was a bus transportation that came to downtown Phoenix, and I guess it was done away with because it wasn't considered cost effective. What are some of the changes to recreate that system to take people from Maricopa to where the jobs actually are?
So the question was relating to, we used to have a bus that would go from here to Phoenix, and that was not, they couldn't sustain that financially, so they did away with that system. Again, we're trying to sort of incrementally get to a place where we can do that type of service. What's not known really well yet is that we do have a service now that will take you, and I think it's $3 each way, will take you from, on Tuesdays, from Maricopa to Dignity and Chandler, or anywhere within a 5-mile radius, and then back. On Thursdays, we'll take you to Banner Health in Casa Grande, and anywhere within a 5-mile radius, and then back. So that is a service we provide now. It's not quite the same thing, but again, we're still trying to make sure that there's enough demand that we can be using these services and kind of a little by little make those more prevalent and more just more usable. Because I think our transit system this year is over $600,000 to keep running. Most of that is paid for by a grant through the state, but we do have to really operate under their rules, and they have some pretty strict rules that we have to follow. What we also do have what we call, other than the regular fixed route system, we have an on-demand system. It's basically like a cab that runs Monday through Friday that you can call, and it's, I don't know, 50 cents or $1, something like that, to ride pretty much anywhere in town. But that's something that we're trying to get away from and get back to what you would normally think of as a bus route, something where you know that the buses are stopping here at a certain time. You had a question? that was me, if that was me doing 55 down Smith Inc., I apologize. It could have been. Very, very possibly. Thank you, I appreciate that. So your question was, can you kind of go back to your original question?
At what point do you address the traffic speed when you have widening the lane because you're expecting more traffic?
When we get to your part, can you bring that up? I'm gonna defer to Public Works on that one because that's more their area. When things are designed, they are designed for a particular speed, as I think you're kind of alluding to. When timing-wise, that's something I'm not as clear on because that's more of an operational type of function, and that's Public Works is much more operational in nature. Does that make sense? So I'm gonna let Josh. Hold your question in for about like 30 minutes, and then you'll probably be good. Yeah. Okay. Right. So, yeah. So what she was saying was there. Yeah. Yeah. I do know there is a plan to do that, but again, I'm going to defer to Josh on timing and things like that. So, question? Okay, so regarding, you were talking about transportation specifically. What other methods do we use to gather input and information regarding those needs and trends and things like that? So we did adopt a new area transportation plan in 2015, late 2015, and that was a 2-year process, I think, and it really is, it has several different levels to it. It has, within particular areas of Maricopa, within the entire city of Maricopa, and then regionally, what are the needs. We really get a lot of information on trends and the kind of where we're going development-wise and how fast we're going to grow from MAG, which is Maricopa Area Governments, Association of Governments, that's what it is. So if you've ever heard of can't think of what it is, MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization. MAG is our Metropolitan Planning Organization. They really focus mostly on those transportation type issues. And we got a lot of information from them. They run these computer models that is based on the information that we're giving them. Things like how many building permits are we doing and what are those trends? Do we see more last year and are we gonna see more next year? Or we maybe see certain areas of Maricopa, but then how does that fit in with Casa Grande? How does that fit in with Phoenix or Chandler or anywhere else that we might be going to? And then that information is all kind of fed into that model. We also have traffic engineers that we pay large sums of money to kind of interpret that data and give us a better idea and really paint the picture for us. So we also look at the land uses and how those land uses interact with each other and the transportation system. It gets pretty complicated very quickly. So does that help at all? A little? Hold on. What? Say again.
Well, because, you know, because I'm just wondering, you know, just as far as the community, I think Summit had asked this question in regards to the, you know, the buses that we have, you know, all of the, Academy services and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Post-attendance. How do you know where people are going? You know, how do you know if they're going to Chandler, or if they're going to downtown Phoenix, or if they're going to Tempe, or, I mean, how do you know? Because how do you know if they'll ask?
We have put out several different surveys over the years. We've put in different. We have asked for input in meetings, in I don't know 1,000 different meetings that we've been to over the last few years, and then we do get a lot of that information from census. We get a lot of that information from the different organizations. I don't claim to understand where they get all of their data, but we do get some pretty reliable data from, you know, how would I stand here and tell you that I know that 90% of our workforce that lives here is going outside Maricopa every day to work? Again, kind of same question you have. Unless we ask, how do we know? Well, we do have other sources of information, and again, I'm not gonna get too into detail with that, but yes, sir.
Traffic engineers that you talk about, are they doing vehicle counts? At around P-15, when I first graduated from high school, they put the interstate system in Ohio. I was coaching them as a job in Ohio, where we went out and we counted vehicles because they had to come where they walk with the interstate. Now, I know traffic engineers sit at the intersection, they'll count the cars to the left, cars to the right, cars to go straight, coming off this street, that street, this street. Are you using that data to get what you need to develop your system?
So there is some. So your question was, you know that the traffic engineers will, I mean, they'll either pay an intern to sit at a corner and count cars as they go from here to there, and when they turn, and how many are turning during what hours, and things like that. Or they will also use, if you ever run over those little black tubes in the road, they're counting cars with those tubes. So that information is part of how we're figuring things out, and it's just depending on what's needed at the time. So, but yes, they still do a lot of that. There's a ton of that. Correct. Correct. It does come down to the number of vehicles traveling. Yes, that's correct. I saw someone else with their hand up. Sir? Oh, right, you're next. Okay, so first question was, are we reviewing the HOAs, their CCNRs, to make sure that they comply with what the city has for regulations? The answer to that is, on the front end, yes. Not so much for compliance with the city regulations, more to make sure that we know that they have the CCNRs. It's a CCNR is what we consider a private agreement, right? A private contract. So the city really, and this is across the board, every city I've worked in, the city really has very little to do with those CCNRs. It's independent of our city zoning code. That said, we try to work closely with the HOA managers to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page. And most of the times, those CCNRs are more restrictive than zoning code, which is fine. You can do that as long as I'm willing to sign on the dotted line when I close on my house, then that's fine. Again, private agreement. The second question was, I'm sorry. Okay, so does our building department inspect buildings, new projects within those HOA areas? Yes, we inspect every structure that goes up in the city, every one of them, whether it's on private land, or public land, whatever. If it needs a permit, we inspect it. So, you got a question? Right. Right. I mean, they do, and they do periodic surveys and things like that. And maybe that's we're just talking to people as they're coming off the buses or something like that. But think about it too in terms of, I mean, so back in the day when Detroit was Detroit, right? How much money did they have to spend on their transit system? Quite a lot. Quite a lot. We're still a little. I mean, we're almost 50,000 people. We still have a relatively small budget. So again, we're getting to that. We're going to get to that, and we would love to be able to provide services like what you're talking about. Like, let's get everybody who needs to go. Pardon? They still do that, yeah. And I grew up near Chicago, so I know what you're talking about. And it's, we'd love to be at that stage. If it makes you feel any better, yeah. If it makes you feel any better, we have more than Casa Grande does, which is nothing. So we always look at it that way. We go, well, what does Casa Grande have? They don't have any transit at all. But they are looking at what we're doing as a model. How do we successfully implement something like this within the city of Casa Grande? And then once they have something set, how do we connect those two systems together? That, all of a sudden, we've just doubled what we can do. So that's something that's coming, but we've got to do it slowly because we've already proven that if we just jump straight to it, then we just can't sustain it. It's just too expensive. And we take away from all the other services that the city is providing that, quite frankly, can be more important. You know, all of the other, you know, keeping the roads themselves repaired and built and things like that. So I think this is my last slide or maybe one more. So I know Josh is just chomping at the bit to get up here. So I'll just run through this. We really have kind of two sets of documents that we operate on from development services. And some of them are what we call more guiding documents. And that would be that 2040 vision, Planning Maricopa, the general plan. We also have some of those smaller plans like the Parks, Trails, and Open Space Master Plan, the redevelopment area plan, the transportation plan, those sorts of things. And then we have things that are more regulatory in nature. So they're not, hey, maybe you should do this, but it's you shall do this. The zoning code, the subdivision code, and then we also have some, what you see those last three are these design guidelines. Again, these are more kind of, hey, we'd love it if you do this. We are encouraging you to do this, which that really what those are is a setup to, in the future, to say these are going to become regulations. It's no longer going to be a suggestion. We've talked about citizen participation really over the 2 years of the 2040 vision and into the general plan. I think we did something like 120 meetings. Some of those meetings were attended well. We might have, I think the very first open house we did for the general plan, there was over 100 people there, which I thought was great. Then we got further on in the process and we maybe only got 15 or 20 of those people coming back. A lot of times you see the same people too. So as I've been a planner for almost 20 years, that's the most frustrating part of the job, I think, other than code enforcement, is the fact that we want people to come out, we want to get that input, and it becomes really difficult. I've often said, hey, we ought to tell everybody, you know, you have this one small thing that's happening. We'll just tell everybody that a landfill is going in across the street from your house. And then we'll have everybody come out and then just pull the old bait and switch. Nobody ever likes that idea, so I've never done it. But we do highly value the citizen participation. That's something that as I was trained as a planner, is we're advocates, we are stewards of the land, we're a voice for the people who live here. And for the first time, I live in the place where I work, so I'm kind of part of that process. I'm a little more invested than I think I have been in the past. So again, very important to us. I think we've been going questions. I'll take 2 or 3 more questions if anybody has them. And that's my granddaughter, by the way. Okay, I think we're good. Thanks, guys. Go ahead and take a 10-minute break. And then I guess about quarter after, you'll have Josh present for Public Works.
Close to the 8 o'clock scheduled time as possible. Good news for you. Good news, bad news. My name is Joshua Plum. I'm the engineering floodplain manager for the city. I am not Bill Fay. The good news is I'll get you out here faster than Bill would. That is true. I am not as entertaining. I do want to thank you for your interest in this and your interest in what Public Works Department does for the city. Hopefully you're interested, not here to check a box, but if you are, don't tell me. My ego is fragile. Public Works Department, as the slide says here, providing quality customer service by effectively building and maintaining the city of Maricopa's infrastructure while protecting the health, safety, and public welfare of the community. Just a brief outline of our structure here. The Public Works Director / City Engineer, Bill Fay, who is this evening on military training. He's got Finance Administration directly below him. To my side is engineering. Engineering, floodplain management, capital projects, and plan review. We've also got facilities management and janitorial services, street maintenance, and fleet management. The responsibility purpose, obviously, to protect the health, safety, and public welfare of the community. We do this through public participation, public input. Like Martin said, we try and get public involvement in the projects that are coming up, making sure that you're aware of them as they're coming, making sure nothing's a surprise for you. We get your input and feedback before we do anything. Floodplain monitoring and evaluation. As you know, floodplain is a very big issue in the city of Maricopa. It goes through a big chunk of the city. That means there's certain developments that are restricted, things that can't go in there until they've been addressed. How we address those, how we monitor those and evaluate those is part of our process. Capital improvement program is the building of the streets and the roads and everything that you see. This building that you're in now is part of the capital improvement program. Street and public infrastructure and maintenance, making sure the roads are there and viable for you and sustainable for you, and that you're not hitting major potholes on your way in here. And then engineering review of all the development that comes through. A little bit about the capital improvement program. The capital improvement program is a 5-year program that the city develops and publishes each year. And it defines how the city is going to be spending its capital dollars each year and over that 5-year program. And it's fire stations, parks and rec, it's every building that the city owns and is built in the city. It's every road that the city has built under city funds. A little bit of State Route 347, and it's traffic control. There's a number of components that go into that. Engineering plan review is a big component of what we do. It's a critical component of making sure that things are done right for the city, that we are taking the necessary steps to make sure that things are safe, that we are looking out for the public interest, that the developers are looking out for the public interest, and things are not going through in a way that's going to create issues. We're always looking at flooding and drainage issues. They are 2 separate issues. I know they kind of seem like one and the same, but flooding and drainage issues are 2 separate issues, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the floodplain component of it. Flooding being more of a regional issue, stuff that's flowing from our watersheds up from the south, and drainage being sort of more localized as the rain falls here and where does the water go so that your streets are not flooding. Roadway configurations, and that addresses a little bit of what was discussed earlier with Smith Inc. and how the traffic is exiting onto Smith Inc. And I will get back to your question on that. I think there's a slide later where it's a little bit more appropriate. Health and safety. When we're reviewing the plans, we want to make sure that what's being proposed to us, what's being presented from the developers, from our own project, is not going to be a detriment to health and safety. Sight distance is a little teeny component of what we're looking at, and that's to say that when you're coming up to an intersection, there's not a bush blocking your view of traffic coming to the left, coming to the right. You can see there's not a building there. Those are the setbacks that we established so that you are able to see safely before you pull out, whether you're pulling from a stop or pulling from a lighted signal. Maintainability and sustainability. Is this something that's going to be here in 5 years, and 10 years, and 20 years for you? We don't want to build a road that's going to crumble and fall apart. We don't want to build buildings that are not going to be maintainable, that are going to be too expensive to maintain or not going to be around for one reason or another. Traffic marking and signage. Obviously, this is a significant component. You need the stripes in the road to tell you what lanes you need to be in. Stripes to designate where bicycles can be safely as they're moving down here. Signage to let you know when lanes are merging, when you've got to stop, when you've got to yield to oncoming traffic. and aesthetics. And a lot of people don't think of engineers being very good with aesthetics, and it is true. And by and large, we look to development services to establish what the aesthetics are for the city. But the aesthetics that we take a look at, the aesthetics with which we're concerned, are the aesthetics of the right-of-way. We don't have a lot of overhead power poles in this city. It's because we make the utilities underground their lines, and that's an aesthetic component that we enforce. And I think it creates for a better community, an enhanced environment. We don't let new utility poles come in. We don't let single poles for telecommunication come into the right-of-way. They have to go in special areas. They have to be screened a certain way. And so those are the things that we take a look at with our plan review. Floodplain administration. Now, you may or may not know that Pinal County is the city's floodplain administrator. So anything that comes in to the city that's going to be put into the floodplain has to go through Pinal County. We're the first stop for that. We're the first ones to take a look at it, determine that it's in the floodplain, advise that a floodplain use permit's required, and then it goes to the county, and the county will establish what regulations have to be followed. And they follow the FEMA regulations. We are a National Flood Insurance Program community, which means that we follow the FEMA regulations, and in exchange for that, they allow us to have, or they allow the properties here to have federally backed insurance. Yes, ma'am. The question is, does that mean because we have federally backed insurance that we do not have to buy flood insurance from government? Within FEMA regulated floodplains, you do still need to buy flood insurance in order to maintain that federally backed insurance, federally backed mortgages. Outside of floodplains, you are not required to have flood insurance. We do always recommend it. Flooding is a possibility anywhere, but you are not required outside of the FEMA regulated flood hazard areas to have flood insurance.
Do our realtors know that? They don't tell people. Most people I talk to have no idea, and had no idea floodplain, and don't have flood insurance.
So the question there is, do the realtors know that, and is the information being disseminated from the realtors? I don't know. I'm not sure what the realtors know. I'm not sure what information's out there. The insurance companies know. The insurance companies are aware of whether or not the flood insurance is required. One of the things that happened a few years ago was there was a remap created by FEMA that added a few areas into the federally regulated floodplain. And there are still some residents, maybe within those zones, that don't know it. We've tried to do very good outreach with that. Pinal County did outreach, FEMA did outreach, and all of the mortgage companies and insurance companies should be aware of it, but I can't say with absolute certainty how well the realtors know. Yes?
All Maricopa, all the developments are in the floodplain, or just certain areas of Maricopa?
Only certain areas. The question is, are all the developments in Maricopa in a floodplain? There are certain areas in Maricopa that are developed in a floodplain. They were not at the time of development in what FEMA had designated as a floodplain. Development of homes in a floodplain is not something the county allows, and so by extension, not something the city allows. I don't have a good graphic, unfortunately, of what the floodplain looks like in the city, but there are big swaths that run through the North Santa Cruz Wash is a fairly wide floodplain that runs north to south through the city. The Santa Rosa Wash is much more constricted because of the channel that runs through the city. And then a little bit over to the west, we've got some other tributaries and washes there. Yes? So your comment is that people across the street find themselves in a floodplain, and you do not. The way that FEMA regulates a floodplain, what's designated as the 100-year flood, the 1% chance of annual flooding over 1 foot, that's what creates the FEMA regulated floodplain. So if it is less than 1% chance over the year, or it is less than a foot, you are not in a regulated floodplain. So a subtle difference in elevation across the street can be what makes that distinction between 1 foot of flooding and less than 1 foot of flooding. And so that's all part of what FEMA takes into account when they're doing their assessment and establishing those floodplains. Yes?
How many acres are involved in the floodplain within the city limits?
The question is how many acres are in a floodplain within the city limits, and I'm sorry, I don't know that number right now. In terms of the portion of the city that is in a floodplain is mostly undeveloped, not developed properties. But I don't know what the total acreage is. The third bullet point here is something that Bill puts in here. He likes to point out to everybody, not actually related to flooding. It's a bit confusing of a statement, but what the point is that Bill tries to make with this is this is not localized flooding. Floodplain management is not the rain that comes here and backs up and creates ponds in the streets or ponds in your front yard. This is based upon a regional determination of watersheds that really come from Mexico. They come from South Arizona, flow into Mexico, flow out of Mexico back into South Arizona, and all the way up here, and sort of, terminate out at the Gila River. So this is not about local rainfall. This is not about flooding that occurs here. We also interface with the Maricopa Flood Control District. That's a local district that established many of the washes that we have in town and are responsible for the maintenance of many of those that are not already have the responsibility of HOAs. And then we also look for opportunities to improve drainage and flood control structures. Whenever the opportunity arises for us to take properties out of the floodplain, we're always looking for that and finding ways to handle that. Engineering is a major function of what Public Works does, and that's the component, that and the floodplain are the components for which I'm responsible. And we're responsible for on-site private improvements, reports, and plats. That means any development that comes through, they want to put in a parking lot, we're checking to make sure that they've done the reports correctly, that it's going to drain appropriately, that the soil information is correct, that the land slopes the right way so all the water goes to the right area and into a storm drain and into retentions. We also review right-of-way improvements. Everything that is in the street, everything that is the curb, everything that is the sidewalk, and sometimes a few feet behind the sidewalk is what's within the public right-of-way. And that's the area with which we are primarily concerned to make sure that those improvements conform to all of the regulations, engineering regulations, standards of care, city regulations, state regulations, county regulations. Also the off-site street signing and striping plans. As I mentioned earlier, signing and striping is critical to navigating the streets. If you don't see where the lane lines are, don't see where the stop signs are, then it's chaos. Traffic control plans for construction. When people are coming in, they're doing work on our roadway, they set up barricades. And those barricades, as I'm sure you've all seen, have the habit of restricting traffic a little bit. So those plans have to come through us so that we can ensure to the best of our ability and to the best of the ability of the traffic control that it's not hindering traffic, that it is creating a safe condition and not an unsafe condition. Obviously, if they're doing work in the roadway, restrictions have to take place, but we want to make sure the restrictions are no greater than they have to be, but also no less than is required by state so that we're not creating an unsafe condition. And then the traffic impact analysis for new developments. When a Circle K comes in, when a subdivision comes in, when a restaurant comes in, they create traffic. And every new development is responsible for an analysis of that traffic to say what is the impact going to be and ultimately what has to be done to address it. And sometimes it's the width of driveway, sometimes it's a traffic signal, sometimes it's an improvement to a roadway, widening a roadway in order to accommodate that. But everyone's got to come in with that information, and we do the review on that to make sure that the information that's being provided to us is reasonable and fair. We are the city's floodplain administrator, as I mentioned. We are the liaison with the county, so that we are the first stop for anything that comes through that's going to be in the floodplain. Access management for street networks. Access management is critical for streets because every development wants a driveway. Every development wants a street. And we don't want 100 streets along your arterials exiting on there. It's necessary for us to say that it goes into a collector, and the collector goes into that street, because otherwise we'd be fighting with traffic coming out of 100 different places along a mile. So that access management is one of the things that we're responsible for overseeing and making sure that we're within fair regulations. We try and have along an arterial 2 or 3 collectors coming in within a mile. Obviously, in a business district, we're going to have more driveways, but if we can manage that and consolidate driveways to limit the number of cars that are coming directly out from a business onto the street, that's our intent. I can certainly address Smith Inc. here. So the question you had asked earlier was with regard to speed control along there and what will be done with Smith Inc. and at what point do we look at that? Am I correct? Okay. Excuse me. So to address that, we are taking a look at reducing the speed limit through there. She's not here anymore, but as the lady who's on the Transportation Advisory Committee did say, we are taking a look at reducing the speed limit through there. We have gone through the advisory committee with our recommendation. We are going to council with our recommendation to reduce the speed limit to 35 miles per hour from signal to signal, roughly. So as you're coming out of the library, as you're coming out of that subdivision, you'll be going through a lower speed area, and that would be both directions. The engineering analysis, when the street is done, tries to take into account what speeds will be coming through there, what the appropriate design speed is for the road. It's an arterial road, so typically in the city and in most cities, speed limit is 45 miles per hour, and that's how it's designed. We're looking to slow that down a little bit through that area. One of the questions that come up is why not a traffic signal at that intersection? And we are exploring the possibility. The difficulty with it is very close to an adjacent traffic signal. And there is a minimum distance that we have to meet in order to allow us to put a traffic signal there. And then there's an advisable distance that we have to meet. I think we meet the minimum distance. Don't quote me on that. We don't meet the advisable distance. But that'll be part of an analysis that we do. It'll be taking a look at traffic flow, traffic numbers coming out of there, and the distance to see if that we meet the necessary requirements in order to put a signal in there. If we find that the speed limit is not addressing the issue and a traffic signal is not warranted there and we can't get the necessary requirements to do it, we can look at other options, maybe restricting to right turns, maybe allowing U-turns, further west on Smith Inc. So these are some of the things that we're still exploring. But the short term, hopefully in the next couple of months, is we'll see that the speed limit reduced to 35 miles per hour through there. You're welcome. The last bullet point on this slide is just some of the things that we go over to make sure that we're getting accurate information from the developers, from our own projects. Legal description is very important. We don't want to be working on somebody else's property and not know that we're working on their property. Facilities management is another component of what Public Works does. Look down at your feet, see this beautiful clean carpet? That's us. Building maintenance, building repair, custodial services, energy conservation, the program that shuts down the lights, make sure that we've got an appropriate program for conserving energy. That's part of what facilities maintenance does. They manage the contracts for all the facilities in the city of Maricopa. Fleet management is one more component of what we do. We've got one staff in fleet management. He's got some part-time administrative assistant. but he's very knowledgeable about the industry. He's the guy who knows the guy who can fix your car cheap. That's who we go to. He's responsible for the fleets of everybody except fire and police in the city. So that's public works, that's development services, it's community services, city manager's office, economic development. He's responsible for all of those fleets. He handles the preventative maintenance for all the cars. He handles the purchases and the equipment for it, life cycle management, and then the consultants and contractors who purchase the cars, who do the repairs for the cars, who put the graphics on the cars. And then one of the bigger components that we have in Public Works, several years ago, Public Works and Development Services were one department. And at that time, the phrase Public Works really referred to street maintenance. And so that's what a lot of people still think of with regard to Public Works, and it's still a big component of what we do, operation and maintenance of our streets. And that's everything that's city-owned. That's our streets, it's our alleys, it's the right-of-way where the utilities go. That's the maintenance they do. Pavement and concrete, they grade the unpaved roads. They're responsible for our street signs and our traffic signals, the weed control, the street sweeping, and then the flooding response. You know, we've got some low water crossings, so when it rains and those channels flood, they come out and they do the closures, and then they do the maintenance after the fact. One of the questions that comes up a lot for us is, why do our projects take so long? It's just a road. How long can it possibly take? You just put down some pavement, you're done. Why is it taking this long to do it? And so this kind of illustrates a little bit of what goes into that. And it's broken into simple, moderate, and complex project. A moderate project would be a regular street project, something like the Smith Inc. improvement that we just did. A complex project would be something that maybe has a little bit bigger stretch to it or has federal funding, like the overpass project. Simple projects tend to be parking lots, little sidewalk replacements. But you can see that the initiation phase, this is somebody coming to us and saying, all right, do it. Now we've got it initiated. It doesn't take much time at all. The scoping phase is okay, you told us do it. Now we got to figure out what you want us to do. We're going to sit down and talk about what needs to go into it. We're going to have the public outreach and see what other components have to be involved. Then there's an environmental component to it. What is the impact on neighborhoods, on residents? What is the impact, the environmental impact? Is there a cultural resource impact? Are there burrowing owls in the area? We can deal with that. On moderate projects, simple road projects, that's a few years of work. On a federal project, that's a very long process. There's a lot goes into it. It goes back and forth, the federal government. And as you can see, 3 to 5 years. That's longer than any other component of the project for a complex project. And then final design. Most designs are done in stages. There's a 15% design, what ADOT calls a design concept report, that basically says this is the alignment, this is what we're going to do. Then there's a 30%, which lays it all out on paper, gives you the dimension, shows everybody what it's going to be. It's pretty much set at that point. 60%, it's a little more refined. It defines where the utilities are, what adjustments need to be made. 95%, 100%, these are just final adjustments. But it's in phases, it's little steps along the way. 30, 60, 95, 100%. And at each step, it comes into us. We're doing a review on it, making sure that it's still compliant with what we feel it needs to have. So you can see, even a simple project can be up to 3 years. A moderate project can be 2 to 6 years. And then a complex project, if you've got federal funding on it or it's a longer stretch, can be 4 to 10 years. An outline of some of the maintenance costs. We talk about 20% of public road networks scheduled each year. The city is basically, by our streets department, broken up into 5 segments. And they do it on a 5-year rotation. And within that, they're going to do all the maintenance in the area. They're going to do the sidewalks, they're going to do the streets, and they're going to get it all cleaned up. And then they'll do kind of spot maintenance around the city as need arises, and then within that same year. And then the next year, they go to the next segment and then make their way back around, and at the end of 5 years, they're back. So you can see the costs for some of this are pretty extensive. An AC overlay, this is when they come through and they kind of chip out the road as it is, and then they come down and lay new asphalt on top of that. And that is pretty much the ultimate in terms of repair. It gets it clean, it gets it repaired, it extends the life, but it's something you do near the end of life of a road. The other 4 items here, microsurface, slurry seal, chip seal, fog seal, these are the varying levels of surface that you see them put down on the street. When they come down, they put the black oil on there, that's the fog seal. And when they put a black tar, that's the microsurface. And then there's little levels in between that enhance the road, they kind of rejuvenate it, they help it to last the life of a road. And a typical life of a road is about 20, 25, 30 years. And so this 5-year maintenance program helps it to get to that point. The AC overlay, as I said, that's kind of in the final years of the life, and that kind of rejuvenates it for another 10 years. We also have a bridge inspection we do every 2 years. A lot of that's contracted out. Some of it's through ADOT. Bridge maintenance as needed, and then signage and striping. That's as needed. As it starts to fade, we come through, but also as these surfaces are done, when they come through and they put on the new surface, they do new striping. And some of you have seen this in your neighborhoods. They've come through recently and done the resurfacing and put the new striping in and put in bike lanes with that. And that's part of the program that our streets department is initiating right now. So our existing revenue streams, how do we get the money for what we are doing? For maintenance, we've got the Highway User Revenue Fund. So this is the state tax on your gas. Every time you go and you pay a couple of dollars in your gas, a couple pennies come to us. So those of you who drive a gas car, thank you. Those of you who drive electric, get out. Road Maintenance Fund, this is development specific. Whenever development comes through and they develop a public road, they build it and then they turn it over to the city. And as they turn it over to the city, they turn it over with a small, like $1 a square yard fee that goes into that we put into a pot so that when we get to that 5-year maintenance cycle, we can draw on that to do the maintenance on their roads. For construction, we get money from grants. These are local grants, these are county grants, these are federal grants, wherever we can find the money to get these done. What is it? Hartman Road, recently we did a surface of the unpaved road out there. And that was done through a grant. That was through a congestion mitigation air quality grant. So now instead of having a dirt road along that stretch, we've got a paved surface along that stretch. We have an additional project coming up to kind of finish off a piece of that and then do some of Farrell Road as well. So whenever we've got the opportunity for grants, we like to take that opportunity. Development impact fees. When a development comes into the city, they pay the city a fee. It's not a big fee for any development, but it's there, and for homes, it's there, and it adds up. And those development impact fees go to police and fire and community services, and then a big chunk of it goes into transportation. And that's what we use to build the roads that we are building to help with these connections. And it's really designed to say that what is the impact of your subdivision? You've got to build your adjacent road, but what do we need to do to fill in the gap? That's where we get to utilize that money, to fill in those little gaps. And then half-cent county sales tax. I think there's a measure coming up for this again soon, but don't quote me on that. But this is the half-cent county sales tax that was approved a little while ago, and that comes into the city. A piece of that comes into the city, and we get to utilize that for construction. Was there a question there? Yes. I'm sorry? Malibu? I'm not familiar with that phrase, but I believe we're talking about the same thing as the impact fee. For each house that is built, there is a fee paid to the city, and that does goes into the infrastructure, it goes into the libraries and parks. I don't know I presume it's passed on to the homeowner, but I don't know how that works internally within the development. Does that answer your question? Okay. So some of the recent CIP projects you might have seen finished up and around town. We've got the Public Works Fleet Fire Maintenance Facility that's just opened up a year ago or so around right at Fire Station 575. Copper Sky Police Substation, just opened recently. The Hartman Road temporary paving project I mentioned, that was a congestion mitigation air quality grant. Smith Inc. improvement at Porter Road. Some various street maintenance that you've probably seen around your subdivisions. We are in the process of a design for North Santa Cruz Wash that the developers would be able to take then and implement a construction project to take properties out of, undeveloped properties out of the floodplain and make those properties viable for future development. And then the Edison Road extension, we just had the ribbon cutting yesterday that now extends Edison Road from its previous terminus at Roosevelt, and it curves up to SR 238, and that's a bypass for people not wanting to go through the SR 238 347 intersection. It's going to spur some economic development down there along the Estrella Gin property, and it's a bypass that now public safety can use that saves them having to go through the neighborhoods to get up to SR 238. Particularly, Fire Station 575 will be a big utilizer of that. And then some current and upcoming CIP projects. Little project you haven't heard of probably, the State Route 347 grade separation. That one is planned for construction start in October of this year. The North Santa Cruz Wash, the one I mentioned before, this is a design that will give them the opportunity, developers the opportunity to come through and take property out of the floodplain. Maricopa Casa Grande Highway, Porter to White and Parker. This is going to be a widening of that section of the street. We are getting ready to initiate design on that within the next month or two. We've got ongoing road maintenance within the segments identified, and then, as I said, as it comes up around town. The next section of Smith Inc. Road from Chase Drive to White and Parker will probably be under construction before the end of the year. We're going to be designing a new fire administration building. The current fire administration modular units are going to be demolished as a part of the SR 347 overpass project. They are setting up a temporary location for it across from Fire Station 575, and then this project will be to determine a permanent location for it and design that. There's a phase 2 of Copper Sky Police Substation, just a little bit of internal additions and some work in the parking lot there. And then phase 2 of the Public Works Fleet Fire Maintenance Facility, which again is just kind of finishing up some stuff that was left out of the first phase. That concludes my presentation. Brief as promised. What questions do you have for me? How would you contact somebody about a bush at Smith Inc. and Vintage that blocks oncoming traffic? This is a good way, and I will make note of that. However, you can call into Public Works Department, let us know about that. You can let Development Services know. They do have code enforcement. I would check into it. In all likelihood, that is homeowner association maintained property, in which case we would look to code enforcement to address it. But in the median, yeah, that is homeowner association maintained through there. However, it's still something that I can take a look at, and we can make sure that we've got appropriate site distance and it's not creating an issue. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Have they determined where they're looking at for the new fire administration building? They have not, absolutely, but they definitely have a strong desire to see it located in the Estrella Gin property along Edison Road, so very near Fire Station 575. Out where the police substation is? The question was, did they look at the property where the police substation is to tie it together? They did not. There is not any more city property right there that would be available for it. Any other questions? The question is, why not right around here? That will be one of the areas that we have looked at when we when we initiate the design. First part of the design is going to be helping us determine what has to go into the building and what the appropriate location for the building is, and then to get us to that 15% design, and then we would go from there into the further design. So we would look at this area, but there is definitely a desire to see it located in the Estrella Inn property. Yes?
These grants we were talking about, do you guys have a grant writer? Do you just apply? Like, how does that work for this particular thing?
We don't at the moment have a grant writer, but I believe we're in the process of hiring one. We have had in the past, up until about 6 months ago, we had a grant writer. And it's really the individual departments looking for opportunities for these grants. Excuse me. And then applying for them, working through our grants coordinator or working through the grant administrator. Maricopa Association of Governments is one of those grant administrators. ADOT is one of those grant administrators, depending on which grant we're looking for, so we can work directly with them and get the requirements in order to follow the necessary guidelines. But yes, ultimately we hope to have a grants writer who can help us keep ourselves out of trouble with the grants. Because there are regulations that have to be followed. It's not like, it's just not just free money. We've got to do, there are steps that we have to follow, make sure we've got, like I mentioned, the environmental in the complex project. Federal grants come with that environmental component. Other questions? Yes? The question was about the new communities that were placed in the floodplain a couple years ago, and if anything's being done to correct that. I can say that the Copper Sky facility was designed to address a portion of that, and the development immediately to the north had a positive impact from the Copper Sky complex, the entire complex. Aside from that, we're looking for opportunities whenever we can to address it. Some can be addressed through study. Some have to be addressed when development comes through and find ways to take advantage of construction that takes place.
So have they done a study, a restudy since this was Copper Sky in?
Yes, a restudy was done since Copper Sky went in. It did. There was a portion of that was taken out. There was a letter of map revision issued by FEMA that I think goes into effect in June. Yes. I can get you the information, the specifics on that. It's also something that Pinal County will be sending out public outreach on, and it should go to insurance companies, but if you have specific questions on that, I can certainly show you what's in the document. And I will give you, if you'd like my contact, I'll give you my card, and you can send me an email, give me a call, whatever you like. Okay. Other questions? Thank you very much.